the 8th of September 1941. German artillery shells crash into Leningrad's residential districts. The Badayev warehouses, containing the city's food reserves, erupt in flames. Thousands of tons of flour, sugar, and cooking oil burn in an inferno visible across the city. Black smoke towers into the sky, carrying with it the sweet, sickening smell of burning food. Citizens watch in horror as their survival literally goes up in flames. The German Army Group North has reached the outskirts of the Soviet Union's second-largest city. 3 million people, soldiers, workers, women, children, elderly, are trapped inside. German forces, supported by Finnish armies in the north, have encircled Leningrad completely. No roads lead out. No railways connect to the Soviet interior. The Neva River and Lake Ladoga remain open for now, but German artillery commands the shorelines. The city is isolated, under siege, and facing annihilation. Adolf Hitler has given explicit orders. Leningrad must be destroyed, not captured. No German soldier will risk his life fighting street to street. Instead, the city will be starved, bombarded, and frozen into submission. The Wehrmacht will wait for hunger and cold to do what bullets cannot exterminate Leningrad's population. Then, what remains will be razed to the ground, its name erased from history. What follows is 872 days of unimaginable suffering. Over 1 million civilians will die, most from starvation and cold, their bodies too weak to survive the brutal Russian winters. The siege of Leningrad will become the longest, most destructive siege in modern history, a testament to both Nazi barbarism and Soviet resilience. This is the story of a city that refused to surrender and the terrible price its people paid for survival. Operation Barbarossa. On the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. 3 million German and Axis soldiers, organized into 3 army groups, crashed across the Soviet border in the largest military operation in history. Army Group North, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb, drove toward Leningrad with orders to capture or destroy the city that bore Lenin's name. Leningrad held immense strategic, political, and symbolic importance. As the Soviet Union's second-largest city with over 3 million inhabitants, it was a major industrial center producing tanks, artillery, ships, and munitions. The city's factories, particularly the massive Kirov works, were vital to Soviet war production. Leningrad was also home to the Baltic Fleet, the Soviet Navy's primary northern force. Politically, the city represented the birthplace of the Bolshevik Revolution. Its capture would deliver a devastating psychological blow to Soviet morale. Hitler understood Leningrad's significance. On the 22nd of September 1941, he issued Führer Directive No. 1601, which stated explicitly, "The Führer has decided to have Street Petersburg wiped off the face of the earth." The problem of the life of the population and of supplying it with food is a problem which cannot and must not be solved by us. In this war for existence, we have no interest in keeping even part of this great city's population. This was not military strategy, it was genocide by starvation, deliberately planned and coldly executed. By early September 1941, German forces had advanced with terrifying speed. Army Group North had covered over 500 miles in less than 3 months, capturing the Baltic states and driving deep into Soviet territory. On September 8th, German troops captured Schlisselburg, a fortress town on the Neva River's southern shore. This seizure cut Leningrad's last land connection to the Soviet interior. The ring was closed. Finnish forces, allied with Germany and seeking to reclaim territory lost in the 1939-40 Winter War, advanced from the north. They reached the pre-1939 Soviet-Finnish border and established positions on the Karelian Isthmus. Though Finland claimed its operations were limited to recovering lost territory. Finnish positions effectively sealed the northern approaches to Leningrad. The city was trapped. Inside Leningrad, Soviet authorities faced catastrophic reality. 3 million people required feeding 2,544,000 civilians, plus 343,000 soldiers and 86,000 Baltic Fleet sailors. Food stocks were minimal. The burning of the Badaev warehouses had destroyed critical reserves. The city possessed approximately 1 month's food supply at normal consumption rates. But these were not normal times. Soviet leadership, led by Andrei Zhanov, the Communist Party boss for Leningrad, and Marshal Klement Voroshilov, initially commanding the city's defense, began organizing resistance. Workers' militias were formed. Women dug anti-tank ditches around the city's perimeter. Factories were evacuated or converted to weapons production. But nothing could address the fundamental problem. Leningrad could not feed itself, and no supplies could reach the city. On the 12th of September 1941, Soviet authorities calculated remaining food stocks: grain for 35 days, cereals for 30 days, meat for 33 days, fats for 45 days, sugar for 60 days. The numbers were a death sentence. Winter was approaching. German artillery and aircraft bombarded the city daily. The situation was hopeless, yet surrender was unthinkable both for Stalin, who would never permit it, and for Leningrad's defenders, who understood that German capture meant death. In November 1941, Leningrad descended into nightmare. Food rations were reduced to starvation levels. On November 20th, workers received 250 grams of bread per day, approximately half a pound, often consisting more of sawdust and cellulose than actual flour. Office workers, dependents, and children received just 125 grams, a quarter pound of barely edible bread. This was the entire daily food allocation. There were no supplements, no additional calories. Adults required approximately 2,000 calories daily to survive. Leningraders received perhaps 400 to 500 calories. The cold was equally merciless. The winter of 1941–42 was exceptionally severe. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius, -40 Fahrenheit. Fuel supplies were exhausted quickly. Electricity failed throughout most of the city. Water pipes froze solid. Citizens burned furniture, books, wooden fences, anything combustible to create brief warmth. Many froze to death in their apartments, too weak from hunger to maintain fires. Starvation's effects were horrific. The human body, denied adequate calories, begins consuming itself. Fat reserves disappear first, then muscle tissue. The heart, a muscle, weakens. People develop dystrophy, their bodies swollen with fluid retention. They moved slowly, shuffling like ancient invalids, conserving every calorie. Climbing stairs became impossible. Walking a few blocks exhausted them. Their thoughts grew sluggish. They became indifferent to everything except food. Death came everywhere. People collapsed in the streets and died where they fell, their bodies frozen in position until spring thaws. Families found relatives dead in their beds, expired during the night from hunger or cold. Children died in their parents' arms. The elderly, already frail, succumbed quickly. The young and healthy, requiring more calories, sometimes died faster than the old. Tanya Savicheva, an 11-year-old girl, kept a diary documenting her family's destruction. Zhenya died on December 28th at 12 p.m. 1941. Grandma died on January 25th, 3 p.m. 1942. Leka died on March 17th at 5:0 amperes, M 1942. Uncle Vasya died on April 13th at 2 after midnight, 1942. Uncle Lesha on May 10th at 4 p.m., 1942. Mother on May 13th at 7:30 amperes, M 1942. Savachev's died. Everyone died. Only Tanya is left. Tanya herself died in 1944 from intestinal tuberculosis, her body too damaged by starvation to recover, even after evacuation. December 1941 and January 1942 were the worst months. Approximately 100,000 people died in December, another 96,000 in January. The death toll would have been higher, but there simply weren't enough living to count the dead accurately. Morgues overflowed, bodies piled in courtyards covered by snow. Burial became impossible. The ground was frozen solid, and gravediggers lacked the strength to dig. Bodies were stacked like cordwood, awaiting spring when burial might be possible. Leningrad's only hope was Lake Ladoga, a massive freshwater lake northeast of the city. During summer, boats could ferry supplies across the lake. But Lake Ladoga is treacherous. Storms arise suddenly, and German aircraft and artillery targeted the boats mercilessly. Tonnage brought across during autumn 1941 was woefully inadequate. When Lake Ladoga froze in late November 1941, Soviet engineers conceived a desperate plan and construct a road across the ice. The ice road, officially called the Military Road Num. 101, but known to Leningraders as the Road of Life, would connect the city to the eastern shore, where rail connections remained intact. Trucks could bring supplies in and evacuate civilians out. The ice road was extraordinarily dangerous. Lake Ladoga's ice froze unevenly. Currents created thin spots. German artillery bombarded the route. Luftwaffe bombers attacked the convoys. Trucks broke through the ice and sank, drowning drivers. Blizzards created whiteout conditions. Temperatures were lethal. Drivers who broke down and left their vehicles died within hours. Yet the ice road functioned. On the 22nd of November 1941, the first truck convoy crossed the ice, carrying flour to starving Leningrad. Initially, traffic was light, the ice was thin, and only small trucks could risk the crossing. But as winter deepened and the ice thickened, larger trucks made the journey. By January 1942, hundreds of trucks crossed daily, bringing in food, fuel, ammunition, and evacuating the weakest civilians. The ice road saved Leningrad. Without it, the city would have died. But the tonnage brought in was never enough to truly feed the population. The road extended the city's agony rather than ending it. Still, it was life, and Leningraders clung to it desperately. Leningraders adapted to survive. They ate anything remotely edible. Carpenter's glue boiled for its protein content, leather belts softened and chewed, wallpaper paste, library paste, petroleum jelly. They scraped buildings where vegetable oil had spilled, collecting frozen residue. They trapped crows, pigeons, rats. Pets disappeared, cats and dogs were eaten. The city's horse population, already depleted by military requirements, vanished into cooking pots. Some turned to the unthinkable. Cases of cannibalism occurred, though the true extent remains unknown. Soviet authorities documented over 2,000 arrests for cannibalism during the siege. Some involved killing victims for their flesh. More commonly, it involved consuming corpses. The NKVD, Soviet secret police, established special units to combat cannibalism. Those caught were executed. The horror of cannibalism haunted survivors, who rarely spoke of it even decades later. Others demonstrated extraordinary humanity. Teachers continued teaching, though students fainted from hunger during lessons. Musicians performed concerts, including Dmitri Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, Leningrad, which premiered in the besieged city in August 1942. The orchestra, assembled from emaciated musicians, some barely able to hold their instruments, performed the symphony as German shells fell nearby. The concert was broadcast across the Soviet Union, and to the world a declaration that Leningrad lived, that culture survived, that the city's spirit remained unbroken. Workers continued production in freezing factories. The Kirov works, despite starvation conditions, produced over 700 tanks during the siege. Munitions factories operated around the clock. Women replaced men called to military service. Teenagers worked adult jobs. The city's defense required constant labor repairing bomb damage, clearing snow, maintaining minimal services, producing weapons. Leningraders worked because to stop working meant giving up, and surrender meant death. While civilians starved, soldiers fought to maintain Leningrad's defense and break the encirclement. The front lines encircling the city saw continuous combat. German forces, unable to capture the city by assault, settled into siege warfare. They bombarded Leningrad with artillery. Over 150,000 shells fell on the city during the siege. Luftwaffe bombers attacked regularly. The Germans sought to destroy morale, industrial capacity, and the will to resist. Soviet forces launched multiple operations, attempting to break the siege. These attacks, costly in lives, achieved limited success. In January 1942, the Lubin offensive attempted to relieve Leningrad. The Second Shock Army, commanded by General Andrei Vlasov, penetrated German lines but became encircled itself. The army was destroyed, and Vlasov was captured, later becoming a collaborator. The offensive cost approximately 95,000 Soviet casualties for no strategic gain. Throughout 1942, Soviet forces maintained pressure on German positions, launching attacks that pinned down German divisions and prevented their redeployment to other fronts. These operations were costly. Soviet casualties in the Leningrad sector during 1942 exceeded 300,000. But they kept German forces occupied and gradually weakened the siege ring. The Leningrad front, commanded by various generals, including Leonid Govorov, held a defensive perimeter around the city while simultaneously supporting offensive operations. Soviet soldiers lived in conditions nearly as terrible as civilians, cold, hungry, under constant bombardment. Yet they held their positions, understanding that if they broke, the city died. 1942 to 1943, prolonged agony. The siege continued through 1942 with unrelenting grimness. Food supplies improved marginally. The ice road and summer boat traffic across Lake Ladoga brought in more supplies than the first winter. Rations increased slightly. Deaths from starvation decreased, though malnutrition remained universal. The bombing and shelling continued daily. German artillery, positioned within range of the city, fired on timetables. Citizens learned when bombardments occurred and planned accordingly. The psychological toll was immense. Survivors lived in constant fear, perpetual hunger, unending cold during winters. Families were destroyed, children orphaned, parents bereaved, siblings lost. The trauma was universal and profound. Many survivors suffered lasting psychological damage. Depression was endemic. Suicide rates climbed. Yet the city functioned, producing weapons, defending itself, surviving day by day. In January 1943, Soviet forces launched Operation Iskra, Spark, designed to break the blockade. The Leningrad and Volkhov fronts attacked simultaneously, attempting to link up and create a land corridor to the city. After fierce fighting costing approximately 115,000 Soviet casualties, the operation succeeded in creating a narrow corridor south of Lake Ladoga. The land siege was broken. A railway line was hastily constructed through the corridor, bringing supplies directly into the city for the first time in 16 months. The corridor, only 6 to 7 miles wide, remained under German artillery fire. Trains traversed it at night, running without lights to avoid targeting. But it was a land connection, and tonnage increased dramatically. Food supplies improved. Rations increased to near subsistence levels. Deaths from starvation declined sharply. Leningrad could breathe again, though the siege continued. By January 1944, Soviet military power had grown enormously. The Red Army, victorious at Stalingrad and Kursk, was pushing German forces back across the entire Eastern Front. Leningrad's liberation became possible. Soviet forces prepared a massive offensive Operation January Thunder designed to shatter Army Group North and liberate the city completely. On the 14th of January 1944, Soviet forces attacked from multiple directions. The Leningrad, Volkhov, and Second Baltic fronts launched coordinated assaults supported by massive artillery barrages. Soviet forces, numbering over 800,000 troops, attacked German positions held by approximately 400,000 defenders. The weight of numbers and Soviet operational skill overwhelmed German defenses. Within days, Soviet forces broke through German lines. German units retreated westward, abandoning positions held for over 2 years. On the 27th of January 1944, exactly 872 days after the siege began, Soviet forces completely liberated Leningrad. Artillery salvos announced the victory, 324 guns fired salutes, and the sky lit with fireworks. Citizens poured into the streets, weeping, embracing, celebrating survival. The siege was over. The city had held. Leningrad had not surrendered, had not been destroyed, had not been erased from history. Its people, through incomprehensible suffering, had won. The siege of Leningrad's death toll remains disputed. Soviet authorities officially claimed 632,000 civilian deaths. Modern historians estimate the true number exceeded 1 million, possibly reaching 1.5 million when including surrounding areas. Military casualties added another 1 million Soviet soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. The total human cost approached 2.5 million lives. Most civilians died from starvation. Their bodies simply consumed themselves until vital organs failed. Others died from cold, freezing to death in unheated apartments. Disease killed many: dystrophy, tuberculosis, dysentery, typhus. German bombing and shelling killed approximately 17,000 civilians. But the vast majority died from the siege's indirect effects: hunger and cold. The survivors bore permanent scars. Malnutrition during critical developmental years stunted children's growth. Women who survived often became infertile. Heart disease, gastrointestinal problems, and psychological trauma affected survivors for decades. Many never spoke of their experiences, the memories too painful to articulate. Entire generations were destroyed. Families ceased to exist. The city's population, approximately 3 million in 1941, had fallen to 700,000 by 1943. Some had been evacuated, but most had died. The demographic catastrophe was staggering. The siege of Leningrad raises profound moral questions. Primary responsibility lies with Nazi Germany. Hitler's explicit orders to starve the city, his refusal to accept surrender, his determination to erase Leningrad from existence, these were deliberate acts of genocide. The Wehrmacht implemented these orders faithfully, maintaining the siege and bombardment for 872 days. But Soviet leadership also bears responsibility. Stalin's refusal to evacuate the city earlier, when roads remained open, condemned hundreds of thousands to death. His insistence that Leningrad must hold at all costs meant civilians paid those costs in blood and starvation. Soviet military operations to relieve the siege were often poorly planned and executed, squandering lives without achieving objectives. The NKVD's harsh enforcement of discipline, including executing defeatists and traitors, added to the civilian toll. The Finnish role remains controversial. Finland's cooperation with Germany, including its advance to the Karelian Isthmus and the establishment of blockade positions, contributed to the siege's success. Finnish claims that they merely reclaimed lost territory ring hollow, given that their positions prevented Leningrad's relief from the north. However, Finland refused German requests to advance beyond the old border and did not actively bombard the city. The siege of Leningrad stands as one of history's greatest atrocities and one of its most remarkable stories of survival. The siege demonstrated Nazi Germany's absolute barbarism, the willingness to exterminate entire populations through deliberate starvation. It revealed the Wehrmacht's complicity in genocide, dispelling post-war myths of the German army's clean conduct. The siege also demonstrated Soviet resilience and the Red Army's growing military capability. Leningrad's defense tied down significant German forces. Army Group North's 18 divisions could have been deployed elsewhere, potentially altering battles in other sectors. The city's survival provided a propaganda victory and morale boost to Soviet citizens and allied nations. The siege influenced post-war Soviet identity. Leningrad's suffering and survival became central to Soviet narratives of the Great Patriotic War. The city was awarded the title Hero City and received the Order of Lenin. Monuments, museums, and memorials commemorated the siege. The 872 days became sacred in Soviet and Russian memory. Remembering the siege. Today, Street, Petersburg, Leningrad's post-Soviet name, remembers the siege through numerous memorials. The Piskaryovskoye Memorial Cemetery contains mass graves holding nearly 500,000 siege victims. The eternal flame burns there, and visitors leave bread as offerings, a gesture acknowledging the hunger that killed so many. The Museum of the Defense and Siege of Leningrad preserves artifacts, documents, and testimonies. January 27th, the Day of Liberation, is commemorated annually. Survivors, now in their 80s and 90s, gather to remember the dead and celebrate survival. Each year, fewer survivors remain. Soon, none will be left, and the siege will pass from living memory into history. The lessons of Leningrad remain relevant. The siege demonstrates the catastrophic human cost of total war and ideological extremism. It shows how civilians become targets in modern warfare. It reveals both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human endurance. The siege of Leningrad was hell on earth, 872 days of starvation, cold, bombardment, and death. Over 1 million civilians died, most from hunger, in one of history's greatest atrocities. The suffering was incomprehensible, the death toll staggering, the cruelty boundless. Yet Leningrad survived. The city did not surrender. Its people endured what should have been unendurable. They worked, fought, created art, maintained humanity in the face of systematic dehumanization. Their survival was not inevitable. It required daily choices to continue, to resist, to live one more day. The siege's survivors carried physical and psychological scars throughout their lives. Many never fully recovered, but they lived, and through their survival, Leningrad lived. The city Hitler vowed to erase from history instead became a symbol of resistance against fascism, a testament to the human will to survive against impossible odds. We remember the siege of Leningrad not only for its horror, but also for the courage it revealed. We honor the million dead and the millions who suffered. We acknowledge the cruelty that created the siege and the resilience that defeated it. And we carry forward the fundamental lesson that human beings, even when subjected to the worst imaginable conditions, can choose dignity, solidarity, and survival. Leningrad held for 872 days. The city lived. And in its survival lies one of history's most powerful testimonies to the strength of the human spirit when confronted with evil determined to destroy it.